In today's world, anybody can be a filmmaker. All you need is a camera and an editing program. But in the 1920s, filmmaking was restricted to a much more exclusive group of people. And editing a film was a lot harder than it is now. The first movies with full sound were introduced in New York City, and by the late 20s and early 30s, color had become much more common in feature films. Although Charlie Chaplin's work was very prominent, comedies weren't the only films produced in the 20s. For example, the very first feature documentary, Robert Flaherty's Nanook of the North, debuted in 1922. Following this came Western classics such as The Covered Wagon in 1923. In filmmaking, something called FPS, frames per second, is very important. Basically, frames per second is the rate at which images are produced in a film, and the higher the frame rate, the better the quality. This piece of film was produced at 5 frames per second. This piece of film was produced at 10 frames per second. This one at 15, this one at 20, and this one at 30 frames per second. Now, do you see the difference between this and this? 16 frames per second was the norm for silent films, but by the late 1920s, most films were produced at a rate of 24 FPS. The film economy established in the 1920s set the stage for today's Hollywood. Studio production chiefs made most of the decisions involved in the film industry, which included long-term contracts for actors and directors and a lot of money. When production chiefs saw that certain actors were very popular among the public, they made sure to put these actors in their films over and over again, and made their names known to everyone. These actors were the very first stars of cinema, similar to the ones that we see in Hollywood today. Two of the most famous stars of the 1920s were Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford. Now, they don't say show business is tough for no reason, because it's full of monopolies that haven't changed a bit since the 20s. The following production companies, known as the Big Five, were widely acknowledged as the greatest film producers in 1929. Paramount Pictures, Warner Brothers, Radio Keith Orpheum Pictures, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, and Fox, which in 1935 bonded with 20th Century Pictures to become 20th Century Fox. And 4 out of 5 of those companies continue to monopolize the film industry for over 70 years. So even though films from the 20s and films nowadays can seem very different from each other, they actually follow a lot of the same patterns that were set in the earliest days of filmmaking. And no matter what film you watch today, whether it's a blockbuster like Pirates of the Caribbean or even a simple YouTube production, they both owe a lot of their qualities to the earliest films of the 1920s.
What kind of man was this guy?
What do you mean?
Like this guy, how I'm supposed to be?
Get up and do it right.
Give me my stick.
Get up and do it right.
Give me my stick.
Do it right. The film Economy. I can't say anything right today.
You smacked me.
You smacked me!